The conclusion of the 7 Years' War in 1763 marked a pivotal moment in the relationship between Great Britain and its American colonies. Britain had accrued a staggering national debt fighting the war, much of which was spent defending the North American territories. To manage this financial burden, the British government sought new sources of revenue. The American colonies, which had benefited from British military protection, seemed a logical place to raise funds. This decision represented a significant shift from Britain's long-standing policy of salutary neglect. Previously, the colonies had been largely left to govern their own internal affairs and trade with relative freedom. King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763, which forbade settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. This angered colonists who had hoped to expand westward after the French threat was removed. The first major revenue-raising act was the Sugar Act of 1764. It increased taxes on foreign molasses and other goods imported into the colonies. The act also implemented stricter enforcement measures to combat smuggling. Colonial merchants felt the economic pinch immediately. However, it was the Stamp Act of 1765 that ignited widespread, organized opposition. This was the first direct tax levied by Parliament on the colonists. It required that a stamp be affixed to all legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, and even playing cards. The colonists were furious, not just about the cost, but about the principle. They argued that taxation without direct representation in Parliament was a violation of their rights as Englishmen. The famous slogan, "No taxation without representation," became the rallying cry of the resistance. Secret societies like the Sons of Liberty formed to protest the act. They organized boycotts of British goods and intimidated stamp distributors. In several colonies, the distributors were forced to resign before the act even took effect. The Stamp Act Congress, a meeting of delegates from 9 colonies, was held in New York City. They issued a declaration of rights and grievances, asserting their rights. Faced with economic pressure from British merchants hurt by the boycotts, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. The colonists celebrated their victory, believing they had successfully defended their liberties. However, on the very same day, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act. This act affirmed Parliament's full authority to make laws binding the American colonies in all cases whatsoever. The underlying constitutional conflict had not been resolved. In 1767, Chancellor of the Exchequer Charles Townshend proposed a new set of measures. The Townshend Acts imposed new duties on imported goods like glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. Townshend believed the colonists would accept these as external taxes on trade, rather than internal direct taxes. He misjudged the colonial mood entirely. The colonists saw the Townshend Acts as another attempt at taxation without representation. Resistance reignited, with non-importation agreements becoming widespread. Women played a crucial role, organizing spinning bees to produce homespun cloth as a substitute for British textiles. Tensions were especially high in Boston, a major center of protest. Britain dispatched troops to Boston in 1768 to enforce the acts and maintain order. The presence of a standing army in peacetime was deeply resented by the citizens. Friction between the soldiers and the townspeople was constant. On March 15, 1770, this friction erupted into violence. A confrontation between a mob of colonists and a squad of British soldiers led to the soldiers opening fire. 5 colonists were killed in the event, which was quickly dubbed the Boston Massacre. Propagandists like Paul Revere created powerful engravings of the incident that stirred anti-British sentiment throughout the colonies. In the wake of the massacre, Britain partially repealed the Townshend Acts, leaving only the tax on tea. This was done to assert Parliament's right to tax the colonies. A period of relative calm followed for a few years, though the underlying issues remained. Committees of correspondence were established, allowing the colonies to communicate and coordinate their actions. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. The act was designed to save the financially troubled British East India Company. It granted the company a monopoly on the direct sale of tea in the American colonies. While it actually lowered the price of legal tea, the colonists saw it as a deceptive ploy. It was seen as a way to make them accept the principle of parliamentary taxation. In several cities, the company's tea ships were forced to turn back. In Boston, however, the royal governor insisted the tea be unloaded. On the night of December 16, 1773, the Sons of Liberty took decisive action. Disguised as Mohawk Indians, they boarded the 3 tea ships in the harbor. They proceeded to dump 342 chests of tea into the water. This act of defiance became known as the Boston Tea Party. The British government was outraged by the destruction of private property. Parliament responded with a series of punitive measures known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts. The Boston Port Act closed the city's harbor until the tea was paid for. The Massachusetts Government Act drastically altered the colony's charter, restricting town meetings. The Administration of Justice Act allowed royal officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain. A new Quartering Act required colonists to house British soldiers in private homes if necessary. Far from isolating Massachusetts, the Intolerable Acts united the colonies in sympathy and outrage. In response, the First Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia in September 1774. Delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies attended. The Congress called for a complete boycott of British goods. It also sent a petition to King George III, outlining their grievances but professing loyalty. The king rejected the petition and declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion. In Massachusetts, colonial militias, known as Minutemen, began to train and stockpile weapons. The British commander in Boston, General Thomas Gage, learned of a weapons cache in the town of Concord. On the night of April 18, 1775, he dispatched troops to seize the supplies and arrest rebel leaders. Riders like Paul Revere and William Dawes set out to warn the countryside. On April 19, 1775, British troops reached the town of Lexington. They were met by a small company of Minutemen on the village green. A shot rang out, its origin still debated to this day. The British soldiers fired a volley, killing 8 colonists and wounding 10 more. The American Revolutionary War had begun. The British marched on to Concord, where they were met with stiffer resistance. At the North Bridge, the Minutemen fired upon the British, inflicting casualties. As the British retreated to Boston, they were harassed by colonial militia firing from behind trees and walls. The shot heard around the world had started a full-scale conflict. The Second Continental Congress convened in May 1775. With the war already underway, he established the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as its commander-in-chief. In June 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill took place. Although a tactical victory for the British, they suffered heavy casualties. The battle showed that the inexperienced colonial forces could stand up to the professional British Army. Despite the fighting, many colonists still hoped for reconciliation. The Congress sent the Olive Branch Petition to the king as a final appeal for peace. King George III refused to even read it. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Senses. It was written in plain, powerful language that resonated with ordinary people. Paine argued forcefully for an immediate and complete break from Great Britain. He attacked the very idea of monarchy and hereditary rule. Common Sense was a publishing phenomenon, selling hundreds of thousands of copies. It swayed public opinion decisively in favor of independence. By the summer of 1776, the Continental Congress was ready to take the final step. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced a resolution for independence. A committee was formed to draft a formal declaration. Thomas Jefferson was chosen as the primary author. He eloquently articulated the philosophical principles behind the revolution. The Declaration of Independence listed the colonists' grievances against the king. It famously asserted that all men are created equal and have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. On July 2nd, 1776, the Congress voted for independence. On July 4th, 1776, they formally adopted the Declaration of Independence. The document was read aloud to cheering crowds in cities across the colonies. There was no turning back. The colonies had declared themselves free and independent states. The war for independence would continue for 7 more arduous years. The colonists faced the mightiest military power on earth. Washington's army suffered a series of defeats in the early years. The winter at Valley Forge in 1777-78 was a time of immense suffering and perseverance. Yet, the army was drilled and disciplined by Baron von Steuben, emerging as a more effective fighting force. The American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 was a crucial turning point. This victory convinced France to formally enter the war as an American ally. French naval support and military supplies were vital to the American cause. The war shifted to the southern colonies in its later years. The final major battle took place at Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. The French fleet blockaded the Chesapeake Bay, preventing the British from escaping by sea. Surrounded and outnumbered, British General Cornwallis was forced to surrender. The surrender at Yorktown effectively ended the war and secured American independence. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, formally recognizing the United States as an independent nation. The colonies broke free due to a decade of escalating conflict over taxation, governance, and fundamental rights. A desire for economic freedom from British mercantilism fueled their revolutionary fire. The influence of Enlightenment ideals provided the philosophical justification for their rebellion. Ultimately, a new nation was forged through protest, debate, and the crucible of war.